Hey there and welcome back to NBA 2K18's My League Mode. My name is Pete and today we complete the 2021 Eastern Conference Finals, a matchup between our expansion team, the Louisville Legionnaires, and the 7th seed Detroit Pistons. Out west, by the way, we have the same picture, 1st seed against 7th seed, as the Minnesota Timberwolves are facing the Oklahoma City Thunder. And before we jump in, I quickly want to say thank you for your patience. I know I've been quiet for a while. I had a lot of things going on that I simply had to deal with, so YouTube unfortunately took a bit of a backseat these last 2 weeks, but now things have settled a bit and we can jump right back into the action. Looking at our matchup, we definitely have an interesting opponent going up against us. Despite finishing the season as one of the lower playoff seeds, the Pistons have been on an absolute roll so far. They not only swept the 2nd seed Bulls in the first round, but they also beat Kevin Durant and his Pacers in only 5 games. And even against the 1st seed Legionnaires, their regular season record is pretty solid, as both teams split the regular season series at 2 wins apiece. Looking at the Pistons roster, we can see a formidable starting lineup with all 80+ players, led at the point guard by rookie Desean Stephens. Stephens has definitely fulfilled his projection of being the most NBA-ready player in last year's draft class, and while he is not as tall as Dante Exum, he is crazy fast and will probably give our 6'6" point guard a lot of work. At the shooting guard then, we see Avery Bradley, currently the Pistons' highest rated player, and much like our starter at the position, Josh Richardson, very capable at both ends of the court. Bradley probably has a slight edge on the defensive end as well as when it comes to three-point shooting, while Richardson will look to get the most out of his athletic advantage. At the 3, we then have Tobias Harris going up against Rodney Hood, an interesting matchup that could go either way, with Harris being a bit more of a bruiser than Hood, while Hood is a slightly more capable shooter. At the 4, we then see former Legionnaire Skal Labissière, who last offseason had to leave the team to make room for his matchup tonight, and that is of course none other than Anthony Davis. And just like in both of the playoff series we've played before, I'm giving Davis a decisive edge here. The X factor for the Pistons then, that could be Andre Drummond, who will definitely not have an easy task going up against Mohamed Bamba, but who is definitely by far the stronger player, which could lead to some crucial advantages for Detroit, especially on the glass and in the low post. Luke Kennard then, the Pistons' 6th man off the bench, a bench by the way that has, just like the starting lineup, quite a bit of length, but likely not as much mobility as ours. Nonetheless, the Pistons should be able to field a very competent 10-man rotation, and at this point it still remains to be seen which positions are going to lead to advantages for both teams. Last thing before we jump in, the Pistons do have some minor injury concerns. Both Anderson and Satoransky will be able to play though, while big man Ellenson is out for quite some time. All of this once again points towards a good situation for the Legionnaires down low, so let's see how things play out as we jump into Game 1 in Louisville, Pistons vs Legionnaires. Now after a slow start, the Legionnaires were able to build themselves a 9-point lead after the first quarter. Their go-to guys couldn't really get going. Instead, Dante Exum scored 6 points for the starters, and Andre Flanders came up big off the bench with 10. Detroit, meanwhile, showed a sufficient lack of outside shooting, and against a tough interior defense like ours, that is going to be a problem. And so from the Pistons' perspective, things also went downhill pretty fast. The game got out of hand pretty quickly in the second quarter, only 4 minutes in and the lead had already grown to 20 points. Andre Flanders stayed hot and scored an additional 13 points, so he was already up to 23 at halftime, followed by Dante Exum, who scored 7 this quarter as the Legionnaires' second highest scorer. The Pistons meanwhile simply with too many turnovers, and at this point also with a -9 rebounding disadvantage, and believe it or not, things would get worse. Quarter number 3 marked Detroit's complete and utter destruction. At the end of the third, the Legionnaires sported a comfortable 42-point lead, and that was partly again built on the shoulders of Andre Flanders, who kept up his scoring output in this quarter as well. Further 13 points bring him up to 36 after 3, while the Pistons had more or less already thrown the towel. Simply put, there was no coming back from this far down. So in the 4th and final quarter, the Legionnaires continued with business as usual. They fed Andre Flanders a bit more, who once again scored 13, and then subbed out to make room for our reserves. In the end then, the Pistons suffer a devastating 44-point loss in Louisville, the final score 131-87. And our man of the match, that was of course Andre Flanders. In only 27 minutes he shot his way up to 49 points, and that is not only a new career high for Flanders, but also a new Legionnaires franchise record. Dante Exum then remained as the second highest scorer with 18, followed by Richardson with 15 and Johnson with 13, while Anthony Davis had a pretty quiet double-double with 11 points and 10 rebounds. So a statement victory to start things off, and looking out west, the Timberwolves also with a strong performance. A 20-point victory over the Thunder gives them the series lead, so for the 2 first seeds, things are looking very good indeed. And we are now jumping into game number 2 to see whether or not things remain that way. And the Legionnaires actually with a small lineup change. After dropping 49 points in game 1, Andre Flanders gets to start in this one, and that means Josh Richardson will come off the bench. The first quarter then was once again marked by a slow start, as both teams could not really find their shot. The Legionnaires, however, still finished the quarter with a 10-point lead, and that was mostly because of Detroit's bench unit. As I mentioned earlier, the Pistons do have a lot of length off the bench, but they are quite literally a step behind when it comes to the athletic department. Players like the injured Kyle Anderson, John Lua, Thomas Satoransky or Davis Bertans, they all fell victim to a very fast-paced offense by our second unit, a lineup by the way that saw Josh Richardson score 7 points off the bench in quarter number 1. And that fast-paced offense was also the key to success in the second, where the Pistons once again already showed signs of a total collapse. Next to their bench now, the starters also began to struggle. Their field goal percentage dropped rapidly, they scored only 14 points this quarter after a meager 16 in the first, and well, 30 points at halftime is rarely, if ever, going to contribute to a winning effort. Speaking of contributions, for the Legionnaires, Bryce Johnson was strong in the second. He put up a versatile stat line with 8 points, 7 rebounds and 4 assists, and was definitely the Legionnaires' best player in this quarter. Long story short, the second half would not be much different. This quarter was already the breaking point for Detroit. Behind 12 points from a strong Anthony Davis, the Legionnaires pulled away to a 36-point lead, and so in quarter number 4, the bench unit had not much more to do than to drive this one home safely. Not the hardest task against a demoralized Pistons squad, and we even saw a few highlights come out of it. In the end then, the Legionnaires cruise on to another easy victory. The 30-point win here gives them a 2-0 series lead, and puts them in the best possible position as the series now heads over to Detroit. As you can see here in the box score, our starters saw limited minutes in this one. For AD, his 23 minutes was still enough to produce a very efficient 26-9 stat line, while Bryce Johnson was productive as well with 21-9 and also with 4 assists. Richardson dropped 17, Flanders meanwhile struggled quite a bit on his way to 13, and will likely return to the bench for the next game, while Mitch Dennis rounds off the list of double-digit scorers with 10. For their defensive efforts, Deontay Davis and Mo Bamba also get a mention. Davis had a good night with 6 points, 8 boards and 4 steals, while the concerns regarding Bamba's matchup disadvantage against Drummond did not come true. In only 22 minutes, Bamba grabbed a game-high 13 rebounds to go along with 2 steals and a block. We are back with the playoff tree, and we can see the Timberwolves have also taken care of business at home. Just like the Legionnaires, they won game 2 as well, and with a 2-0 series lead are now heading off to OKC. The Legionnaires, meanwhile, are traveling to Detroit for Game 3, where the Pistons are now looking to bounce back from 2 devastating losses. And surprisingly, despite being blown out in the previous 2 games, the Pistons look determined to start this one, and on their home turf they quickly built themselves a 7-point lead in quarter number 1. The Legionnaires, meanwhile, shot below 30% on their way to a grand total of 17 points. 7 of those came from Andre Flanders, but even he was struggling. However, in the second quarter, the Legionnaires were able to cut the lead down to 1, with Flanders, Richardson and Dennis combining for 14 points, and also thankfully with much improved shooting. Still, the Pistons remained in the lead behind a strong team effort, although of course only barely if we have a look at the score at halftime. And there was no turning point in sight in quarter number 3 either, as both teams remained neck and neck. Especially our bench unit was strong in this quarter, while the starters struggled a bit, and so 17 of our 27 points this quarter came from our bench players. Mitch Dennis contributed 7, Bryce Johnson had 4 points and 6 rebounds, but despite all that, Detroit still sports a 1-point lead thanks to many good drives and lots of opportunities at the free throw line. So it would come down to the 4th and final quarter, where Detroit's rookie Desean Stephens absolutely took over. He scored 16 points this quarter, blew by defenders left and right and regularly finished over players like Bamba and Davis, but still the Legionnaires did not go away. 10 points from AD and 6 each from Flanders and Bamba kept them in the game, and so things came down to the wire with less than 1 minute left to play. With an opportunity to go 2 for 1, Tobias Harris takes an ill-advised contested mid-range jumper. The shot misses though, and the Legionnaires are off to the races. On the break, Flanders draws 2 defenders and dishes the ball over to a wide-open Mo Bamba, who converts the layup and cuts the lead down to 1. And with the lead being that small and still a few seconds between shot and game clock, we decide not to foul here, and instead wait and see what the Pistons can come up with. Stephens, however, dribbles himself into a bit of a bad situation. With the shot clock winding down, his pass is intercepted by Bamba, and once again the Legionnaires are on the run. This time, however, the easy pass to Bamba does not reach its target. Stephens steals the pass and makes up for his mistake earlier, and then with the game clock winding down, 2K screwed me over as well. I was hammering the intentional foul button like a madman at this point, but Rodney Hood just couldn't be bothered, and so in a nail-biter finish we lose in Detroit as the Pistons take Game 3 102-101. Our two top scorers for this one, Flanders and Davis, with 21 and 20 respectively, and you can see it here, our starters once again played somewhat reduced minutes, simply because our bench was simply on fire in the third, and was, in my opinion, the main reason we didn't lose this game earlier. Dennis had 12 and Richardson 11, both of them were pretty good from outside in this game, while Bamba also put up 11 with 7 boards and 4 assists. Bryce Johnson then was one of the big factors in that third quarter. Half of his points and rebounds came in the third, as he finishes just 1 basket shy of a double-double. And for the first time, we also have to give a shout out to one of the Pistons players, as Desean Stephens absolutely torched us in the final quarter. He finished the game with 30 points, 4 rebounds and 5 assists, all of that going up against much taller, very capable defenders, and I think no matter how this series goes from here, this was very likely an incredibly important game for him. Taking another look at the Western Conference Finals, we can see that we are not alone in our struggles. The Timberwolves also give up Game 3 against the Thunder, who squeezed by Minnesota in a 4-point victory. Time for Game 4, and the Legionnaires are definitely not looking to lose another one, and so after the tough loss in Game 3 they put their foot down immediately in this one. And they were very much back to their old ways. After quarter number 1 they already had a 17-point lead, thanks to some fantastic performances from Mo Bamba and Dante Exum. Bamba finished the first 12 minutes with 8 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 steals and 2 blocks, while Exum was already on a good path towards a double-double with 6 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists and the steal. Anthony Davis added a further 7 points, and Detroit's offense was stopped at every turn and produced only a meager 11 points. However, as good as the first quarter was, the second one started off extremely bad for Louisville. They only scored 2 points in the first 6 minutes of the period, while Detroit rallied behind Desean Stephens, who had 10 points this quarter and who helped his team slowly chip away at the lead. So what had once been a comfortable margin was now reduced to a narrow 4-point edge at halftime, and as you can see in the stats overview here, it was a very defensive-minded affair. In quarter number 3 then, the Legionnaires luckily caught themselves. They got some good production out of AD, Exum and Richardson, and were quickly able to get the lead back up to double digits. The Pistons meanwhile saw some good scoring from Tobias Harris, who had 9 points this quarter, but on the defensive end they simply couldn't stop a smooth Legionnaire offense that shot over 60% from the field and scored again and again in the paint. In the fourth and final quarter then, Detroit tried everything they could, but every time they came closer, the Legionnaires had an answer, and the double-digit lead from before was enough to hold the Pistons off until the final buzzer. We saw Hood and Bamba with 8 points each in the fourth, while Exum added a further 5 assists on his way to a new career high. And so with a 13-point victory, the Legionnaires now take a commanding 3-1 lead, as the Eastern Conference Finals are now heading back to Louisville. And our starters played a lot more tonight, and especially Mo Bamba made the most out of his minutes. His final stat line: 21 points, 18 rebounds, 5 assists, 5 steals and 2 blocks. He shot 75% from the field and was actually only 3 blocks shy of a 5x5. Anthony Davis follows with 19 and 8, but Dante Exum no doubt also stepped up tonight. He double-doubles with 15 points and 15 assists, and we will look past the 7 turnovers for once, because the 15 assists also mark a new career high for him. Richardson and Hood then had 15 and 14, and with that all of our starters scored in double figures. Meanwhile for Detroit, Harris and Stephens carried the load, and while Stephens shot his way up to a very efficient 19, Harris was not necessarily adding to his team's success despite being the top scorer, as he shot only a poor 34% from the field. So the Legionnaires now with a 3-1 series lead, but out west things are all tied up, as the Thunder once again win by only a small margin. And with that, it is now time for Game 5 back in Louisville, and the pressure is on. The Pistons have their backs against the wall, while the Legionnaires have not lost at home in this playoff series, and so it was no surprise to see a hard-fought first quarter that ended with both teams tied up. Richardson was strong for us with 10 points, Bamba added 6 with 8 rebounds and 2 blocks, while for the Pistons, Harris was the top scorer in this quarter with 11, a lot of those coming off of free throws. Quarter number 2 then went much like the previous one. The game continued to be a back-and-forth affair that remained tied at halftime. Tobias Harris still produced for Detroit, while Louisville's scoring was distributed a bit more evenly, and the slight edge the Legionnaires had on defense was negated by Detroit's better shooting numbers. And yes, even in quarter number 3 it was more of the same. No team was able to build even the slightest lead. For us, AD scored 10 and Flanders 8, while for the Pistons, Harris was once again the go-to guy with 7. The teams then began to trade 3-pointers late in the quarter, and Detroit actually had the slight edge in that shootout, and so for the first time in this game we have a quarter break with one team in the lead. And in fact, in the fourth quarter, the Legionnaires were trailing behind that lead for the most part, as for long stretches Detroit simply could not miss. Still, the Legionnaires never stopped the fight, and on a quick run near the end of the quarter were actually able to tie the game back up. And that is also where we jump in, with the game tied at 104, with a bit over a minute remaining, and with the Legionnaires desperately trying to create an opportunity for AD. The Pistons, however, double-teaming aggressively, and with time ticking down, Davis has to take a tough fadeaway, but as expected it misses and we're going the other way. A quick handoff play near the top of the key gets the ball to Avery Bradley, and soon after Tobias Harris works himself into a very good position down low. The pass comes immediately and results in an easy 2 points. Detroit now up by 2, but somewhat slow to get back on defense, so a wide open Bamba in the paint forces the D to collapse, and that quickly creates an open 3 for Richardson in the corner, and maybe also thanks to his gold corner specialist badge he nails the shot and puts the Legionnaires up by 1. A big shot that immediately forces Detroit to take a timeout, but of course things are far from over yet. Out of the timeout, the Pistons are slowly setting things up. Eventually, they settle for a pick and roll with Bradley and Drummond, but once again it's Richardson with the big play, stealing the ball away from Bradley with only a small difference between shot and game clock. On the break then, Bamba does not take Drummond one-on-one, and instead we're now taking it slow and look to run down the clock as much as possible. A bit of a risky strategy, I know, but it does pay off eventually. Once again, AD gets doubled in the post, but this time Stephens commits the reach-in foul, and that foul resets the shot clock, and with that we could now in theory run the game clock down to 0. The Pistons are of course not going to let that happen, but with Rodney Hood they send our best free throw shooter to the line, and reliable as ever, Hood sinks them both and gives the Legionnaires a 3-point lead with just under 6 seconds left to play. Even that, however, is still not unanswerable, but of course Detroit needs a 3 by any means necessary, and while Drummond is not the man for it, Bradley is, and knowing that, Exum's premature jump actually gets rewarded here, as coming down he swats the ball out of Bradley's hands, and with that seals not only the game, but also the series. 2 more free throws are now only a minor inconvenience ahead of the final buzzer. Still, Exum makes them both, and 0.2 seconds later the Legionnaires win the game and become your 2021 Eastern Conference champions. For the Legionnaires, this marks the first official trophy in franchise history, but of course the journey isn't over yet. After all, the Legionnaires have just booked their tickets for a trip to the NBA Finals, which might end up being the crowning moment of a fantastic season. For this Eastern Conference Finals series, we wrap things up with one more look at the box score, where we can see 6 Legionnaires in double figures, led by Anthony Davis with 22 and 10, followed by Richardson with 19, and by my personal player of the game, Mohamed Bamba, with 17 points, 17 rebounds, and 7 blocks. And with that, we now head back to the playoff tree for one last time in this episode, and we can see the finals matchup is set. It will be the first seed from the West against the first seed from the East, as the Timberwolves take care of the Thunder in 6 games, and so the team around Karl Anthony Towns will now be our opponent in the Legionnaires' first ever NBA Finals. I am of course excited to see how that series is going to go, and I would actually like to know your predictions for it, so let me know in the comments below who do you think is going to win, and how many games do you think it's going to take. For today, we'll make the cut right here with the Legionnaires in the finals and everyone thankfully still healthy, and in the next episode we will then see who takes the crown. Until then, as always, if you liked this episode, then I would be happy if you could leave a thumbs up, and if you want to support the channel further, then you can either subscribe if you haven't already, or you can also support the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.